Hare Krishna. So today is our last class here in this series of the glories of Lord Caitanya and Navadvip Dham and Jagannath Puri Dham. And this class is going to be about Lord Caitanya's ecstasies in Jagannath Puri towards the end of his manifested leelas. So I have a little PowerPoint for this one, at least for some of it. Let me share my screen. Yes. Let me just do a few things to make this nice. Okay. I wanted to do this too. All right. Well, this is a really beautiful picture. I didn't see it in such big size before. So, yeah, we heard about how Lord Caitanya took sannyas. This is the sannyas ceremony. We heard how it was really ecstatic. He took sannyas at the age of 24, and at that time he left Navadvip. And then he went to Puri initially during the first 6 years of his sannyas life. So basically from age 24 to 30, he traveled a lot. He kept his base was in Puri, and he stayed at the house of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. That's Lord Caitanya there with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. But as we heard, he traveled all over South India. So that was the time when he was really like full speed ahead, spreading Harinam Sankirtan. And he was empowering everybody that he met to become, an instrument for also spreading this Prema Nam Sankirtan all over India. And that was 2 years that he was just constantly traveling from one place to the next, visiting temples and holy places and making people devotees. And then he came back to Jagannath Puri. And then he has continued. So this is still during that 6-year period where he's using Puri as his base, but still traveling. So during that time, he would sometimes go to Bengal, and he would stay in the house of Advaita Acharya, and his mother Sachi would come and cook for him and feed him and be very happy to see him. All the Bengali Vaishnavas would come over. All the residents of Navadvip would come to get his darshan, his association, like that. And also during this time, he went to Vrindavan. There's a whole description of Lord Caitanya's visit to Vrindavan. This picture shows him embracing Govardhan Shila. So you can see in the background here, he's at the foot of Govardhan Hill, and he's seeing the Govardhan Shila to be non-different from Krishna. So he's embracing it with feelings of love for Krishna. Then also on this trip to Vrindavan, on the way, he passed through the Jharikand forest, and he made all of the animals in the forest dance in ecstasy, and the deer were embracing the tigers and dancing with them, and everybody was happy on the transcendental spiritual platform in Lord Caitanya's kirtan. And then he came back to Puri, and for the next 6 years, he stayed very solidly in Puri. He shifted his residence at that time from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's house to the house of Kashi Mishra, which was closer to the temple, and it was more peaceful and private. He was going into more of a private phase of his life, although maybe not yet so private, but more settled in Puri. And but yeah, at this time he was still quite socially active. He would go out to Jagannath Temple every day, and he would receive guests and associate with all kinds of devotees and visitors, and he would preach. And of course, every year they would have ecstatic Ratha Yatras, like we heard about in the last class. So he was still very active and engaged in, things that were going on in Puri and people that were there. Then in the last 12 years of his life, and that's what we're going to talk about today, This is his Antya Lila. Antya means the end. So this is the end phase of his life. These last 12 years, Lord Caitanya entered into a more a different phase. It was just a different phase of his life where he retired basically into private life. And he was staying, there in the house of Kashi Mishra. There was a room, a small room. It was his own private room that was called Gambira. And he would stay there in the Gambira, chanting, and he was not completely alone. He had some very confidential, close associates with him, namely Swarup Damodar Goswami, Ramananda Roy, and also Raghunath Das Goswami was around for parts of that. And he had a servant named Govinda who used to attend to him. And then there are a few others, but mainly the main associates here were Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy. And in their company, he would be immersed in hearing and meditating on Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. And because he was in that mood of Srimati Radharani, then whenever he thought of Krishna, then he would feel intense separation, like we were talking about in the last class. And sometimes, in fact, quite often, he would lose consciousness. He would lose his external consciousness. He would become so internally absorbed in the pastime, and he would become so ecstatic, like his emotions of love for Krishna and the pain of separation and all different flavors of emotions that we're going to talk about in a minute would become overwhelming and basically knock him out. He would just become, he would lose his external consciousness and become totally oblivious of everything else. So in this way, he demonstrated this stage of devotional service, which is called Prema Bhakti, or pure love for Krishna. And for those of you who have studied the Nectar of Devotion, Rupa Goswami describes the 3 stages of bhakti, which starts with sadhana bhakti, beginning with Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. And then, for those who have more of a Vrindavan mood, then that Vaidhi sadhana bhakti will develop into Raganuga sadhana bhakti. And then by cultivation of sadhana bhakti, one comes to bhava bhakti, or devotional service in, sadhana bhakti means devotional service in practice, and starts with just following the rules and regulations of devotional service, according to the guidance of one's spiritual masters, Diksha Gurus, Shiksha Gurus, and just practicing. And then by that practice, then one's constitutional position awakens, and one starts to feel emotions in relation to Krishna. So that's bhava bhakti. And then when that becomes very intensified, and in a particular rasa, one is aware of their relationship, eternal constitutional relationship with Krishna by that point, then it develops into prema. So Rupa Goswami discusses this in the first 19 chapters of the Nectar of Devotion. And then the rest of the book is all basically about prema bhakti, what inspires prema bhakti, how it manifests in the different rasas, and what forms of expression it might take. So in the beginning, in these classes that we've been doing, it was mentioned how Lord Caitanya came to show us how to be devotees, how to practice Krishna consciousness. And specifically, not just how to be a Vaidhi sadhana bhakta, but how to come to gradually up through these stages to the stage of devotional service and pure love for Krishna. And this was Lord Chaitanya's mission. Remember when, I think, was it the first or second class, we were reading about how when Krishna came to perform his pastimes 5,000 years ago, and then when he went back to the spiritual world, he was thinking, well, I showed my pastimes, but I was such a short time in Vrindavan. Mainly I was in Dwarka, and so that mood became predominant, you know, the mood of awe and reverence, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He did all these wonderful, miraculous things. And so he was thinking, how's anybody ever going to be able to basically forget that I'm God and develop real, just, you know, love for me in a mood of sweetness? So he said, I need to go back. I need to go back and show people how to practice Raganuga Bhakti and show them what that looks like when it evolves into Bhava Bhakti and Prema Bhakti. So yeah, Lord Chaitanya, in giving people love of God, he didn't just give them a spiritual discipline. He didn't just give us a spiritual discipline to, you know, regulate our lives and come to the mode of goodness and be peaceful and happy, but he gave us an intensely emotional experience of pure ecstatic love for Krishna. And so he showed that. Yeah, so in the Nectar of Devotion, the later chapters 29 and 31, then Rupa Goswami goes into some detail about how ecstatic love for Krishna is expressed. And he lists these 33 Vyabhicharani bhavas, or expressions of ecstatic love. And it's pretty amazing, you know, if you look at this list here, you know, they call it ecstasy, but usually we think of ecstasy as like intense happiness, but a lot of these expressions here, feelings, don't look very happy, right? I always thought that was so interesting when you read about ecstasy, how, you know, I mean, just look at it, like disappointment, lamentation, that already looks like the opposite of happiness, right? Humility, guilt, fatigue, intoxication, pride, doubt, apprehension, intense emotion, madness, forgetfulness, disease, confusion, death-like symptoms, laziness, inertness, bashfulness, concealment, remembrance, argumentativeness, anxiety, thoughtfulness, endurance, happiness, eagerness, violence, haughtiness, envy, impudence, dizziness, sleepiness, and alertness. So another thing you can see here is that, like, some of them are just totally contradictory to each other, right? There's pride and there's humility. There's happiness and there's lamentation. There's sleepiness and alertness. So like that. It's just yeah, it's just so such a variety, you know, such a range of emotions. So what it shows is that in the spiritual world, there's nothing is lacking. The whole range of, you know, human emotions is there in the spiritual world. And even here, when we're talking about, it looks like there's some, you know, bad qualities, you know, like maybe like envy and violence and things that we think of are bad qualities that we need to get rid of. But when they manifest on this stage of ecstatic love for Krishna, it's totally different. It's transcendental. It's not like, we're not talking about anarthas here or, you know, ignorance. This is just like totally transcendental. So yeah, so these are some of the different emotions that might manifest at the stage of prema. And then these emotions, they produce different effects in the body. So the reason I'm going through this is because, you know, we're going to see how Lord Chaitanya exhibits all these things. And so Rupa Goswami is explaining, this is the science of devotional service. This is what these stages, this is what is going to happen, you know, at these stages. This is what you're going to feel. This is what is going to happen. And then Lord Chaitanya just shows that. So we're going to, there's a moth going on my face. Lord Chaitanya is going to show that. Okay, so when these emotions come up very forcefully, like in intense love for God, then it makes things happen. So there are voluntary expressions of these emotions and there are involuntary expressions. So first of all, the voluntary expressions, so these are things that we have control over. You know, they make you want to dance or roll on the ground or sing very loudly, stretch the body, cry loudly, yawning, breathe very heavily, neglecting the presence of others, drooling, laughing like a madman, wheeling of the head, and belching. And some of these are maybe a little odd, but at least some of them I'm sure that you've experienced, like dancing, you become enlivened and you just want to dance, you want to sing very loudly, you want to call out. And maybe, like on Harinam, there's people watching and you just don't care, you're just oblivious, you don't really care what other people think about you. You might think this must look really crazy, but you just don't really care at all. You're just too ecstatic to care. Okay, so those are the voluntary expressions. And then there are the involuntary expressions, which are called sattvika bhavas. And these are things that we can't control. They just happen and there's nothing you can do about it. So becoming stunned, perspiring, standing of the hairs of the body on end, faltering of the voice, trembling of the body, changing of bodily colors, shedding of tears, and devastation. So those are the involuntary expressions. And then it's interesting, it's such a science. Rupa Goswami presents all this as so scientifically. And he explains how a particular symptom, these ecstatic symptoms, manifest depending on which element of the body is agitated by love. So, for example, when love for Krishna agitates the earth element within the body, then one becomes stunned. When it agitates water, then there's shedding of tears. When it comes in contact with the fire element in the body, then there's perspiration. With air, there's trembling, faltering of the voice, standing of the hairs on end. And then when it contacts the ether, then because ether is more subtle, you'll see that the more subtle they go, the more strong the effect. So when the ether is agitated by love for Krishna, then it causes changing of color in the body or complete loss of consciousness. So usually when these symptoms take place, they last for just a short time, and they can be, sometimes they can be mild. If they're mild, they can be concealed. So, many devotees, even, devotees in our movement may experience these symptoms, but they kind of conceal it. They don't let anybody notice. But if they're very strong, or if many symptoms are being felt simultaneously, then it's more difficult to conceal. So in Caitanya Charitamrita, in this Antya Lila, then Krishnadas Kaviraj describes Lord Chaitanya's emotional states in some detail. And we see all the above manifestations of ecstatic love, plus more that are not even listed by Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Devotion. Those ones are not exhibited by ordinary devotees, even at the highest platform, but are, only felt and only manifested by devotees who are at the highest stage of prema, called Mahabhav, which is the stage of prema of Srimati Radharani. And because Lord Chaitanya is Krishna in the mood of Radharani, then he's also in that Mahabhav stage of prema. And so he manifests some exceptional, inconceivable forms of ecstatic transformation in his body, which if it happened to any of us, we would just die. But because he's the Lord, he doesn't die. So that's why Rupa Goswami doesn't include those here, because those things are not going to happen to us. Okay. So, yeah, and the reason that, pure devotees, they feel these symptoms of love, but for the sake of others, they don't manifest them, because ordinary people wouldn't understand. They would think that you're either physically unhealthy, they take you to the emergency room, or mentally unstable, they might take you to, some kind of mental health clinic or something to get help. Whereas none of those things are going to help, because it's not a material health issue. It's not a material, physical, or mental health issue. It's a transcendental, it's a transcendental state of the heart and mind, which is manifesting through these material bodies, gross and subtle bodies. So because Lord Chaitanya knew that people were not going to understand, and they would probably be a little freaked out, a little, shocked and perhaps horrified by some of the states that Lord Chaitanya would get into, that in these last 12 years of his life, he kept himself, he was very private. This is a picture of the house of Kashi Mishra, the Gambhira, and within there's a small room, which and those of us who are going on this parikram will go to when we go to Puri. We're going to go there with Vaisheshika Prabhu. So, yeah, Lord Chaitanya was there with just 2 or 3 devotees who understood his heart very well. And of course, his heart was Radharani's heart. He was in the mood of Srimati Radharani. And those 2 associates that I mentioned that were so key in this phase of life, Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy, that they're Radharani's closest friends in Krishna Lila. They're Lalita and Vishaka. So Lord Chaitanya is in the mood of Radharani, and he has his associates there, Lalita and Vishaka. So just like when Radharani is feeling so much separation from Krishna, then she goes and cries on the shoulder of Lalita and Vishaka, and they try to console her with some meditations or consolations or, something. Somehow or other try to console her, even though she's inconsolable. And so Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar, they try to do the same for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We're going to see. Okay, so this is a picture of Lord Chaitanya with Ramananda Roy. I think this is not exactly in Puri, but it's when they first met. But anyways, Ramananda Roy was always there with Lord Chaitanya in his Antya Lila. And they were very sensitive to Lord Chaitanya's mood. Their mood was just to serve Lord Chaitanya by understanding his mood. And then they would sing verses and songs by different Vaishnava poets or from scriptures describing the pastimes and the feelings of Radha and Krishna in those pastimes. So whatever Lord Chaitanya, whatever mood he was in, they would start reciting about a pastime that takes place in that mood. And they would also talk about the feelings of Srimati Radharani and the gopis, which were the same as the feelings that Lord Chaitanya was feeling. And so it would nourish his mood, it would enhance his mood. And and so Lord Chaitanya, he would become so absorbed in the pastime that he would basically he would like internally be transported to that place, and he would enter into that pastime, and he would forget where he was in the real world. So one example of that is that one day he was going to the sea to bathe with his associates, and then he just saw this very large sand dune. And when he saw the sand dune, it's like a hill, right? So then he thought of Govardhan Hill. And then immediately he recited a verse from the 10th canto that was all about the glories of Govardhan Hill. And, and then the verse just was like a hook that just hooked him in, hooked his consciousness and pulled him to Govardhan Hill. And so in his mind, he was at Govardhan Hill. He wasn't on the beach at Puri. He was in Govardhan Hill, and he saw Krishna at Govardhan Hill. He saw the gopis there with Krishna and having pastimes, and he became ecstatic. And then he just wanted to run to them, because his whole thing is he's feeling separation from Krishna. And so he sees Krishna at Govardhan. What does he do? He runs to him like nothing is going to stop him. So it's described that he went running to this sand dune with the speed of the wind. And the devotees you can see in the picture, they're trying to chase after him, but they can't, like he's just way too fast. So he's running, but then on the way to the hill, he becomes stunned with ecstasy. That was one of the symptoms. You become stunned. And all of his hairs standing on end, tears were flowing from his eyes. What to speak of tears from his eyes, even perspiration and blood were coming from the pores of his body. His body changed color. It became white. So we're seeing like all the things that we just saw, all of those symptoms became manifest simultaneously. And then Lord Caitanya just collapsed. He just fell down on the ground at the foot of that sand dune. And then the devotees gathered around him, and they started, getting a wet cloth and wiping his body to, clean him up and try to revive him. And they're chanting Hare Krishna. They're like doing kirtan, right, in his ears. And then all of a sudden, he just jumps up and shouts, Hari Bol! And then everybody's so happy that he's like, conscious again. And then they all start chanting Hari, Hari. But then Lord Caitanya, he's very distraught because he was, in his mind, in his heart, in his consciousness, he was in Vrindavan. He was with Krishna. He was with the gopis. And so he actually says to his associates, he says, who brought me here? I was at Govardhan Hill. I saw Krishna playing his flute, and he was surrounded by cows. And hearing his flute, Radha and all the gopis came there. And then Krishna and Radharani entered a cave, and some gopis asked me to pick some flowers for them. And I was just about to go pick the flowers for Radha and Krishna, and then you all came and made this loud noise and took me away from there to this place. Why did you bring me here? Why did you cause me unnecessary pain? And then Lord Caitanya starts crying. And then all the devotees seeing Lord Caitanya crying, they also start crying. So it becomes a whole scene, that on the one hand, the devotees can't bear to see Lord Caitanya, in these kind of externally apparently horrifying conditions of his body. But at the same time, because they don't see what he's seeing. They don't know what he's experiencing in his heart when these things happen. And so they're just thinking, we need to make it better. We need to make him, conscious again and help him and keep him safe and get him home and all that. So, so then now he's conscious and with great difficulty, they take him to the sea to bathe because they're anyways there by the beach, and then they go home. So this pastime is described in the Antya Lila, chapter 14. And sometimes, out of concern for his safety, they would even lock him in his room there in the Gambhira. They would lock the room door, they would lock the house door, they would lock the gate to the house. There would be 3 locks, all locked up, so that he wouldn't go running out in the middle of the night and get lost or get hurt or whatever. But still he would manage to escape. Sometimes and they would even leave a guard. They would leave his servant Govinda sitting outside the door, but still somehow he would manage to get through. It's just like when he was a child, remember? We were telling that story. The Brahmin came and he was trying to offer food. And even when he was a baby, he would do that thing of getting out through the unlocked door, through the locked door, even with a guard there, and the door would remain locked. So, that would happen. And they would hear him chanting in his room, and I think everything's okay. And then they would not hear the chanting, and they would think, oh, maybe he went to sleep, but then they would get worried, let me just check on him. And then they open the lock and go in the room, and he's gone. He's just not there. And they'd be like, oh no, where is Lord Caitanya? Now we need to send out a search party. So that happened. Another time, there's another incident in Antya Lila chapter 17, where Lord Caitanya, he's there in his room with Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy, and they're talking about the pastimes of Krishna. And this is what they would do. Swarup Damodar would recite a verse. Well, Lord Caitanya would say, please recite a verse. So then he would recite a verse, usually from 10th canto or, some description of Radha Krishna Lila. And then Lord Caitanya would explain the verse. And then while explaining the verse, he would become ecstatic. And then, he would fall unconscious or something. And then they would have to make him come to his senses again. And so that one time, it happened. Hold on. Yeah, one time. So that time when it happened, when they heard him chanting, they didn't hear him chanting anymore. They went in the room, he was gone. So then they sent out the search party. They were looking all over the place for him. And then, hold on. Yeah, they found him in this cow shed. They found him in the Goshala, near the gate of the temple. So this was the temple Goshala, and he was just lying there unconscious. There wasn't a picture of Lord Chaitanya, so I just got this picture because it's described that the cows were all like sniffing. You just imagine him on the ground here somewhere, and the cows are all like there sniffing him and licking him because he's Krishna. So the souls are all attracted to Krishna. But it was a really very transcendentally insane situation there, because what happened was that Lord Chaitanya exhibited one of these really fierce ecstatic transformations, whereby his arms and legs went right into his what is going on here? His arms and legs went into his body, and he became just like a turtle. You know, when you touch a turtle, all the limbs go in the shell, and he was foaming at the mouth, and his tears were flowing from his eyes. And Krishnadas Kaviraj says that he looked like a pumpkin. He just looked like a pumpkin sitting there, and externally he was just completely inert, like not moving. There's like a ball sitting there in the middle of the Goshala on the ground with the cows all around him. So it looked like, you know, nothing was happening, but inside he was feeling this overwhelming transcendental bliss. And the devotees were trying to get the cows away. They were like, move aside, cows. But the cows wouldn't go away. The cows were just like pushing themselves in. They didn't want to give up their association with the transcendental body of Lord Chaitanya. And then again, the devotees were this time they were chanting, they were pouring cold water, they were pouring water on him. They were doing everything to try to get him back to his external consciousness again, but they couldn't. And then they ended up picking him up in that pumpkin, in that form, like a ball-like form of his transcendental body, and carrying him back home like that. And then they put him in his room, and they started doing kirtan very, very loudly in his ears for a long time. And then finally he regained his consciousness. And then as soon as he regained consciousness, all of his arms came out, his legs came out, his whole body came back to normal. So, I mean, just imagine, like, if you were there, imagine, you know, the Swarup Damodar and Ramananda Roy, what they were feeling, you know, to their worshipable Lord Chaitanya, you know, their life and soul, and having to endure him, endure seeing him like that, and all of these, you know, just really mad, really crazy things happening to him. So, and then again, it was the same thing. They brought him to his external consciousness, and then he stands up and he sits down, and then he's looking here and there, and he's like, Swarup Damodar, where have you brought me now? After hearing the vibration of Krishna's flute, I went to Vrindavan and I saw Krishna. Let's see if I have a picture. Yeah, I saw that Krishna was there, and he was playing his flute in the pasturing grounds, and Srimati Radharani came, and he brought her into a bower, into one of the kunjas, and then they were performing pastimes. And I also was going into that same bower. I was also going into that intimate pastime place, and I could hear the sounds of, you know, the ankle bells jingling, and I saw Krishna and the gopis laughing and joking, and I was hearing all their sweet words, all their, you know, indirect speech where they're hinting at things in their loving, charming way. And my ears, it was so joyful to my ears. And then all of a sudden you just made this tumultuous sound and brought me back here by force. So now he's like, now I can't anymore hear the nectarian voices of Krishna and the gopis. I can't hear the flute. I can't hear their ankle bells. What have you done to me? He said, then he goes to Swarup Damodar and he says, my ears are dying for thirst of that. Please recite a verse. So they just got him back out of that state. And, you know, now he's lamenting and he's asking to recite a verse. So now Swarup Damodar is going to recite another verse. And then he's going to explain the verse again, and then he's going to go into another wave of ecstatic emotion, which is going to produce another wave of transformations. And basically, that's how Lord Chaitanya spent his life. That's how he spent actually Krishna's Kaviraj is just one verse where it says that Lord Chaitanya spent let me see. Yeah, Krishna's Kaviraj says that Lord Chaitanya spent every moment of every day for 12 years like this. Just his associates would recite a verse, he would meditate on the verse, he would explain the verse, he would become ecstatic thinking about that pastime, he would internally enter into the pastime, he would lose external consciousness, his body would transform by all these symptoms of ecstasy. He would be experiencing all the 33 different emotions at different times, which are, appropriate to the pastime. And he spent every minute of every day for the last 12 years like that, just in this cycle. So like this, he demonstrated for us the highest ecstasy. Let's see if I have another slide here. Oh, I didn't even tell this one. Let me tell this story. This is another one. Oh my God, this class is going to go late. But this story is so nice. So yeah, another time. So this is from Antya Lila, chapter 18. So they're walking around Puri at night. They're just having like an evening stroll through the parks and gardens of Jagannath Puri. And then when Lord Chaitanya saw those beautiful gardens, you see like this picture here, there's like beautiful forests and flowering trees and plants. And, Vrindavan is just like a big garden and like a big, beautiful park full of flowers and all kinds of, greenery and everything. So when Lord Chaitanya saw the parks and the gardens in Puri, then it reminded him of Vrindavan. And he saw like, these beautiful groves on the bank of the Yamuna, and he got absorbed in the pastime of the Rasa Lila. And so Swarup Damodar, he started reciting this pastime. He started reciting verses from Rasa Lila, and as he was reciting, it was all playing in Lord Chaitanya's mind internally. And then Swarup Damodar was narrating how after the Rasa dance, then they all they were, feeling fatigued from all the dancing, all the, exuberant dancing. And so they wanted to refresh themselves by going into the Yamuna for a little swim, a little refreshing, cooling swim. So, so they're walking through the gardens, and Puri is by the beach. So if you're in Puri, you're never far from the sea. So then they came to one place where you could look down the street and see the sea. And when Lord Chaitanya saw that, in his mind, he was seeing all the pastimes of Krishna and the gopis are entering into the Yamuna for their water sports. Just at that moment, he sees the ocean, and then he just makes a break for it. He just like runs in ecstasy, and he goes and jumps into the ocean, thinking that it's the Yamuna and that Krishna are there and the gopis are there, and he's going to join them in their water sports and splashing. And then as soon as he gets into the sea, he loses consciousness. And then, so he's in the sea now, and he's unconscious in the sea, and the waves are tossing him about and carrying him. He gets caught in a riptide, and it carries him all the way, to the next like town, basically. And sometimes he's underwater, and sometimes he's up on the wave, just like a piece of driftwood, basically, floating like that, and sometimes getting pushed under. So, and the devotees didn't even see this. The devotees were like, somehow, I don't know, they were looking at the gardens and things, and then he just darted off. They didn't even know that he went to the sea. He just disappeared like the wind, by the speed of the mind. So they didn't know where he was. They just looked, and one moment he was there, next moment he wasn't there. So they're looking all over, and from evening all throughout the night they were looking for him. And then just around sunrise they met the fisherman, and then this fisherman described what happened, that he was out in his boat in the middle of the night, and he had cast his net, and he caught Lord Chaitanya in the net. And of course, when you catch a fish, you don't know it's there because it's underwater. So he thought it was a big fish. He felt something heavy in his net. So he's pulling it in. And then he sees that he thinks it's a dead body because Lord Chaitanya is totally unconscious. And then he's trying to get him out of, he's trying to just dump him. He's like pretty freaked out because he's alone in the middle of the night. And now he's got this dead body in his net. And so he's just trying to get it out as quickly as he can. And then he touches, you see in the picture, like Lord Chaitanya's hand flops over his hand. And at that moment, when he touches Lord Chaitanya's transcendental body, then Lord Chaitanya's ecstatic love is transfused to him, basically, in some, transcendental way. And he becomes overcome with ecstasy, with ecstatic love for Krishna. He was a Muslim. He wasn't even a devotee, but just by Lord Chaitanya's touch. And he started chanting Hari, 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 and he couldn't stop chanting Hari, Hari, Hari. And he says that he tried to, even though he's a Muslim, he chants the Nrsingadev prayers for protection, because, he learned this prayer from the Hindus, and they chant it for protection. So he's thinking, well, anyone who will protect me in the middle of the night out here on the sea alone, I'll pray to them. So he would pray that chant, Namaste Narasimhaya every day. And he thought, oh my God, when he started feeling all this, emotions, all this turmoil within him due to the ecstatic love, and he couldn't stop himself from chanting, he thought that he got possessed by a ghost. He thought that this dead body, the ghost of this body, had entered into him. And so he was chanting the Nrsingadev prayers to try to get rid of the ghost, to try to drive the ghost away. But he said that the more he chanted, when he started chanting Nrsingadev prayers, then the ghost's influence became twice as strong. So the ecstasy became even stronger, the chanting became even more. So he's narrating all this. The devotees meet this fisherman on the beach around just after sunrise, and they see him, he's like just dancing and jumping and Hari, 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 Hari. And they're like, okay, this looks like a clue. I think we got a lead here, boys. So they go and ask, have you seen Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Have you seen somebody by this description? And then he's like, Hari, Hari, I haven't seen anyone, but Hari, Hari, I caught this. I don't know what happened to me. And he was just unintelligible. Like he couldn't communicate. He was just totally gone with like ecstatic chanting. And he said, I have a ghost in me. So then Swarab Damodar, he said, all right, he just wanted to calm him down. He said, look, don't worry. I'm actually a very expert exorcist, and I can make this ghost go away. So then he chanted some mantras. He put his hand on the fisherman's head while he chanted the mantras, and then he slapped him. He slapped him very hard 3 times and said, okay, now your ghost is gone. And then that just got him to calm down, because of course, the love for Krishna was still there, and he was still chanting Hari Hari, but his fear and his, all the fear that was associated with it, and his whole like freak out as a result of it was gone, because now he was happy that he wasn't possessed, but he was still just like feeling love for Krishna. So they said, now that the ghost is gone, now show us where this body is. Please take us to where the body is. So the fisherman, he took them to the place on the beach, and Lord Chaitanya was just lying in the sand. He was still unconscious. And this time, the opposite of all his limbs going into his body like a tortoise, his limbs became totally like extended, because of every single joint in his body became dislocated. And they were just like his arm, he already had very long arms. Now they were like twice as long. And like between where his, for his elbow, like his forearm, his upper arm and his lower arm, between that, it was just like a long, like stretch of skin that was just like hanging there. And one bone was over here, the other bone was over there. And there's just like this all stretched out skin in between. And the same with his legs and even his head. Everything was just like elongated and slack. So the devotees, again, they were doing loud kirtan to try to make him come to external consciousness, because they're thinking like, we can't pick him up like this. His body's just all over the place. Like the pumpkin you could pick up and carry, but this was like too much. So you couldn't even hold on to him. It was just floppy. So they did kirtan. Finally, he came to external consciousness. And at that moment, when he opened his eyes, all of his joints just popped back into place. And then similar, he was looking here and looking there and thinking, I was in Vrindavan. I was by the Yamuna. And then there's this picture. This is what's in his mind. Like, here's Lord Chaitanya. And this is what he was seeing. He was seeing all these, the gopis and Krishna and the Yamuna, and, splashing each other and pushing each other down in the water. And also Krishna had expanded himself into so many Krishnas and was enjoying in the water with each gopi individually. And then they all got out and they had a nice picnic on the bank of the Yamuna, and they were eating. And then they went to lie down afterwards. After lunch, they went to lie down in this beautiful jeweled cottage. And Lord Chaitanya is describing all this that he saw. And he's saying, I was so happy to see all this. And then you just came and you just picked me up and you brought me back here, this desolate beach and this ocean where there's just nothing happening. So then Swarup Damodar, he explained to Lord Chaitanya the whole story. Like, actually, let me tell you what happened. You jumped into the sea, you fell unconscious, you got caught in a net. We've been looking all night. Now let's go home. So they took him to the sea to bathe, and then they took him home. And then again, he would ask someone to recite a verse and describe a pastime, and he would explain it, and then he would enter into it, and he'd become ecstatic, and then all these expressions of love would happen. So, yeah, so that's how he spent his life. And that's how he fulfilled his internal mission. This is, again, he would become ecstatic in the room. So let me go back here. I was going to say something before. Yeah, so it's interesting that the ecstasies that Lord Chaitanya exhibited, like I was saying, it's this highest ecstasy of Mahabhav, that it's not ordinary. Krishnadas Kaviraj says that Lord Chaitanya, he showed the extreme limit of love of God. So I remember one time I was reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, and there was a new devotee in the room, and he was just like, oh my God, that's kind of scary. I hope that's not going to happen to me, that all my limbs pop out, or that they all go in my body and become like a pumpkin. I was like, don't worry, that's not going to happen to you. This is the extreme limit. This is not what happens to, ordinary devotees. So it's very unlikely that we're going to end up like that. And we see that even our acharyas don't exhibit this level of transcendental madness. Even, Nitya Siddhas in the spiritual world, like the 6 Goswamis and our previous acharyas, who are all, like Gopi Manjaris, they're obviously absorbed, and it's described in the Sat Goswami Astakam how they're so absorbed in the mood of the gopis and love for Krishna, and they're running here and there in Vrindavan saying, oh Radha, oh Krishna, where are you? Are you just on the hill of Govardhan? Are you by the banks of the Yamuna at Keshigad? Where are you? But still, they were functional. They were very functional in the world. The Goswamis were simultaneously, they were writing books, they were purchasing land and building temples and excavating holy places, and they were talking to important people. They were, fundraising. So they weren't so extreme like this. Lord Chaitanya really, he showed the extreme limit. And Krishnadas Kaviraj comments that Lord Chaitanya was very generous. This was another aspect of Lord Chaitanya's generosity, that, we mentioned about the mood of Navadvip Dham, that it's Odarya Dham. So whereas Vrindavan is Madhurya Dham, the abode of sweetness, Navadvip is Odarya Dham, the abode of generosity. So Lord Chaitanya demonstrated these things. This was his generosity that he showed for our sake, the transcendental power of ecstatic love for Krishna, so that we would see that this is a real thing. And I'm going to end the slideshow because that's my last slide. But I still want to say something very important here. Lord Chaitanya teaches us that bhakti is not just an external thing. It's not just a matter of perfecting the routine or perfecting, the spiritual discipline of waking up early and being on time for Mangalarti and getting our 16 rounds done and, reading a certain number of pages of Prabhupada's books every day, or becoming competent in our services. Of course, it is all that. And certainly those things are essential practices of bhakti, which should never be given up. But Lord Chaitanya is showing that bhakti is much more than that. And as our bhakti evolves, then it becomes more of an internal experience. And Lord Chaitanya shows us how to nourish our internal experience of bhakti, which is by hearing Krishna Katha in the association of devotees. So we see that's what he did. And he came here, like, we talked about how the teacher, sometimes when the student is having a hard time, like, forming the letters of the alphabet, the teacher takes the pencil and write like this, form the letter like this. So Lord Chaitanya is showing us this is how you go deeper in your bhakti. This is how you have an internal experience of Krishna consciousness, is by hearing the pastimes and meditating on those the pastimes and explaining them, in association with senior devotees or devotees who relish those pastimes. Because the more we hear about the glories of Krishna's name, form, qualities, pastimes, associates, then the more we become purified and the more our natural attraction for Krishna awakens. And then gradually, as we go on hearing, then there will also be an awakening of our eternal constitutional position in relation to Krishna in one of the 5 rasas. And then even then we go on hearing. Of course, by then we want to hear, and then we'll hear more, and we'll be particularly enlivened by those pastimes of Krishna which highlight the particular rasa or mood of service that we feel ourselves. And then we'll especially cherish those pastimes, although we'll continue to hear all the pastimes of Krishna, but we'll be specific, we'll really feel like a lot of internal joy and enlivenment when we hear specific pastimes that are, aligned with our mood or our rasa. And then as we go on hearing, then we'll develop aspirations to serve Radha and Krishna in a way that a particular eternal associate serves them. So we're hearing about the pastimes, we're getting absorbed in the pastimes, and we're thinking, wow, it's so nice the way this relationship that this certain devotee has with Krishna. I really like the way that personality relates with Krishna. I really like the way that person, the service that person does for Srimati Radharani is so sweet, so nice. And then, so you develop an aspiration that I would like to help with that. I would like to be a part of that. I would like to be there when that pastime is taking place. That's where I want to be. That's what I want to do. So these, spiritual aspirations develop, or, spiritual desires to serve Radha and Krishna in following in the footsteps of some eternal associate that inspires you. So that's basically Raganuga Bhakti. And then, when that happens, then you want to learn everything you can about that particular associate or that group of associates, and really hanker to serve in their association, to be, the servant of that servant. And then as we go on hearing, it doesn't stop there. As we go on hearing from advanced devotees and aspiring. So now we're aspiring for that service, and we go on hearing, then we'll gradually feel ourselves entering into those pastimes, not just as an observer, but as an actor. Like we saw in one of these narrations of Lord Caitanya, that Lord Caitanya was telling his associates that, they were there and they were going into the kunj, and then one of the gopis asked me to pick flowers for Radha and Krishna. And I was just about to pick them, and you brought me back here. So he was disappointed. So that's, he was an actor. He wasn't just thinking about it and seeing it happening, like, watching TV or something, but he was in it, and he was actively in it. He was doing a service within it. He was engaging, in real spiritual time, in real spiritual time and space with those associates. So this is what Lord Chaitanya came to teach, this process of Raganuga Bhakti, and he taught it by his own example. So for those of you who attended the very first session that I did in this series about approaching Radha and Krishna through Gaur Nitai, we spoke a little bit about that, how Krishna went away, and then he contemplated, if people don't learn about how to serve me in this mood of sweetness, following the footsteps of the Brajabasis, how are they ever going to get to Goloka Vrindavan? As long as they're just so much in the mood of awe and reverence, they're gonna end up in Vaikuntha. So Lord Chaitanya came to show us how to serve in the mood of following in the footsteps of the inhabitants of Braja, with with no conception of awe and reverence, but just pure, like transcendental sweetness, at least on the internal level. Lord Chaitanya exemplified it, and he also taught it. He also explained these things concisely to the Goswamis, and they expanded on it in their books. So the books of the Goswamis, there's so many, even in Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, there are, these things are explained. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize this, that don't think that bhakti is just about following rules and maintaining your vows and getting the externals right. That these are all important because they prepare the ground for the seed of bhakti to grow, and they nourish the devotional creeper, and they also clear out all the weeds that choke it. They are the water and the fertilizer and the sunshine that make it grow. But then there's a lot more coming, because eventually the plant is going to produce flowers. It's going to produce buds, and it's going to produce, those flowers are going to bloom. And those flowers are going to be so fragrant that they're going to knock us out. We're going to become intoxicated with the fragrance of those flowers. And then the flowers are going to produce fruits that are going to be so sweet that we're going to become addicted to them. We're never going to be able to give them up. So the flowers are bhava, or ecstatic emotions in relation with Krishna. And the fruits are pure love for Krishna prema, which is the ultimate goal of life. Actually, it's the birthright for every spirit soul. That's our natural position. Right now, we're in this unnatural position of not experiencing all these things. And so we need to, reorient ourselves. But that's really who we are. And the way to access all this is by worshiping Lord Chaitanya, by worshiping Sri Sri Gaur Nitai, by the process that they've given us, which is Harinam Sankirtan. By chanting nice japa, doing kirtan with the devotees, going out in the street for Harinam, doing book distribution, prasadam distribution, just sharing Krishna consciousness and giving Krishna consciousness very generously to anybody we meet, anybody who will take it. And, giving ourselves also, this Lord Chaitanya's generosity, this odarya, right, is giving. So we're giving books, giving the holy name, giving prasadam, and also giving of ourselves, our time, our energy, our love to new people, to interested people, to help them to become devotees. So this is what Lord Chaitanya did. And this prayer, this prayer that we say for Lord Chaitanya, Namo Mahavadanyaya, Krishna Prema Pradayate, Krishnaya, Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaur Chishe Namaha. That's what it means. I offer my obeisances to the Lord who is Mahavadanyaya, who is most munificent and charitably disposed. Why? Because Krishna Prema Pradayate. He is giving Krishna Prema, love of Krishna, to everyone without discrimination. And then Krishnaya, Krishna Chaitanya. So Krishnaya means he is Krishna, the original personality of Godhead. Krishna Chaitanya Namne, who is operating under the name of Krishna Chaitanya. So he's Krishna operating under the name of Krishna Chaitanya. That's what that means. Krishnaya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Namne. Gaur Trishe Namaha. So Gaur Trishe means with the golden complexion and the mood of Srimati Radharani. Namaha. I offer my obeisances to him. So Lord Chaitanya's Leela is Odarya Leela, and he wants us to continue to expand his Odarya Leela by giving love of God to everyone. We should also be Krishna Prema Pradayate. And we might think, well, how can I give Krishna Prema when I don't have Krishna Prema? How can I give what I don't have? So, yeah, we may not have love of God to give, but we can give people the process to invoke the mercy of Krishna and awaken their own dormant love. And Lord Chaitanya made the process very simple. Just Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And then the Caitanya Charitamrita ends, the last chapter, then I think it's chapter 19, with the Shikshastika prayers, in which Lord Chaitanya, the 8 verses that Lord Chaitanya wrote himself, the only 8 verses that he wrote, glorifying the chanting of the holy names. So that was actually going to be the last class in this series, but because we missed one class because we had an initiation here, then we're going to have to miss that class. But yeah, no, Kartik is over. And yeah, but yeah, this was an offering that I wanted to make for all of you and for the pleasure of the Lord during the month of Kartik, these classes. So I want to thank all of you for listening, and I really hope that these classes have been as helpful for you as they have been for me. I've definitely benefited a lot from putting together these classes, and yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you who are out there listening or will listen in the future, meeting you there in the holy dhams where a lot of these pastimes took place, and we can continue to churn these topics together in the company of senior Vaishnavas like Vaisheshika Prabhu and others that we'll meet when we get there. So, sorry we went a little late, but it's the last class, so I hope you'll forgive me. Any questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Prabhupada Priya Ki Jai.
Hari
Jai, Haribol.
all glories to all of you audience out there. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing this. All right, I better wrap it up. I have to go down to Dhammadrastika. I probably actually just missed it, but it's okay. I'll still offer my lamp. All right. Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki jai. Sri Navadip Dham ki jai. Sri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bo. Hare Krishna, all glories to the assembled devotees.